Okay, so
Right from your
is that my? Okay, well, welcome to North Star Oasis. I have no idea what the extra noise was. Something was running, and I don't know if it was on my computer or if it was on our production facility in the back. Yeah, it was on mine. It was an ad that popped up that shouldn't have popped up. But anyhow, we will eliminate that. So, okay, we're all set. So thank you very much for putting up with our technical difficulties here at North Star Oasis. That's all it's been all day for us is technical difficulties. But thankfully, Dallas Pearson, our producer, and I were able to be in studio early today. And we got everything fixed that we hoped for. So we hope to really have a good show for you today. And as is signatory on our show, as we have done every single week since we began this back in November, I just want to remind you, you only have 236 shopping days left until Christmas. So that being said, make sure you get your Christmas list early, and even though we're not going to be doing any advertising on this esteemed television program, you know that there's plenty of opportunities to come up with things, novel ideas, things that you may think about as we get in with our shows in the ensuing weeks. I know a couple of people, a couple of our viewers have admitted that, hey, you know what, after watching your the model railroad show that you guys had on a few weeks ago, that just reminded me of when I was a kid and I went out and bought a model railroad set. But don't tell my son it's his Christmas present. So a couple of people are already getting on board with the holiday spirit when we still haven't even gotten to summer yet. So that's kind of cool. But we had brought up in the last couple of weeks about the presidential election. There are 89 weeks until the next president is inaugurated. Technically, it's 89 weeks and 5 days and a number of hours. And what we did was show you Hillary Clinton's announcement. So far, she was the first Democrat to announce that she was running for president, but we decided on our production staff that it's fair that if we need to give everybody what we would consider equal time. So what we're going to do now is we're going to show you, and we're taking these in order, so we're going to just highlight one person per week. That way we don't get repetitive information that gets old and boring and stale. And the next 89 weeks will be quite interesting as we are now officially into the next run-up for the presidential election. So in the end of March, Ted Cruz had announced that he was going to run for president. Senator Ted Cruz, first-term U.S. Senator, Republican out of Texas. So I've got two clips that we're going to show you here on his announcement. First is going to be his announcement at Liberty University, just a couple of excerpts, and then an ad that he had put together right after that.
I want to talk to you this morning about reigniting the promise of America. Imagine in 2017, a new president signing legislation repealing every word of Obamacare. Imagine a president who stands unapologetically with the nation of Israel. Imagine a president who says we will stand up and defeat radical Islamic terrorism. I believe in you. I believe in the power of millions of courageous conservatives rising up to reignite the promise of America. And that is why today I am announcing that I'm running for President of the United States.
Well, we know that he's announced, and here's the thing. Ted Cruz is a masterful debater. He is absolutely wonderful in that role. He's a great speaker. He was able to give his entire speech, roughly half hour, 40 minutes, really without stuttering and without a teleprompter. And here I'm sitting here stuttering, and even though I have a teleprompter that's not telling me a single thing, the fact is Cruz is really a fabulous speaker. But here's the problem that we have with Cruz. It's the same problem that we have with Obama. He was a one-term U.S. Senator who didn't have any major accomplishments to his name, who can give a good speech, but what's the substance? So Ted Cruz is really going to have a lot to answer for as we go through this primary cycle. Cruz, again, is a wonderful speaker, but we've seen with Obama that being a president is more about the policy, more about the vision, more about leadership than just giving a good speech. So Cruz has got a lot to prove. And on the Republican side, it is going to be a crowded field. So now let's take a look at what Ted Cruz's message is, his pre-recorded message. And we kind of did the same thing with Hillary one of the last shows.
My story is like that of so many other American families. I'm the son of an immigrant father who fled oppression in Cuba and came to this country with just $100 to his name. My mom was a pioneer in computer science, smashing glass ceilings at a time when women were discouraged from following their dreams. And now, as a husband to Heidi and a father to our two little girls, Caroline and Catherine, I try to share the same messages of hope, freedom, and faith in God that I was raised with. Amen. That's why I've worked so hard to lead the fights to defend these cherished values. Like the historic battle to defund Obamacare, standing up to the leadership from both parties to fight a debt ceiling increase, and putting everything on the line to stop President Obama's illegal and unconstitutional amnesty. We've sent a clear message that America will stand with our allies and against our enemies, and taken on an IRS that was threatening and intimidating its citizens. And the divide that exists in our country isn't between political parties. It's between Washington and the rest of us. It's a time for truth, a time to rise to the challenge, just as Americans have always done, and give bold voice and action to reclaiming the unlimited potential of each and every one of us. Your fight is my fight. I believe in America and her people. I believe in the conservative principles upon which this country was built. And I believe we can stand up and restore our promise, honor the Constitution, and reestablish our leadership in the world. It's going to take a new generation of courageous conservatives to help make America great again. And I'm ready to stand with you to lead the fight. I'm Ted Cruz. If you want more of the same, there'll be plenty to choose from. But if you want real conservative change and a proven record, I hope I can earn your support.
Ted Cruz for president.
So, Ted Cruz, Obamacare is still not defunded. The debt is still large. Now, I will give him a little bit of slack here in the fact that Senator Harry Reid was the majority leader through most of the tenure in which Cruz was the senator. And so it was extremely difficult to get any legislation passed, with Obama's rubber stamp sitting there vetoing anything coming out of the Senate. So I have to give Senator Cruz some credit for at least taking up the fight and for being true to his nature. I will criticize him a little bit here in the fact that it's going to take more than just appealing to the conservative base of one party in order to get elected to the White House and to serve without being known as a partisan hack. And really, if you take a look back at the history of presidents prior to President Clinton, even though there was a lot of divisiveness on issues, the fact is there was still a certain degree of civility. But after the 1992 election, it seemed that a lot of the civility went out, and we got into the era of the politics of personal destruction. So perhaps if Senator Cruz or if any of the other candidates other than Hillary Clinton were to actually get elected, then maybe we can get back into one more step for civility. Now, discussing civility, we also have to look back at a historical time in our recent past, and that would be with music, actually. We lost Ben E. King the other day, April 30th, and Ben E. King, many of you know, was the person who was best known for this song.
When the night has come white music. No, I won't be afraid. Oh, I won't be afraid. Just as long as you stand by. And darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Stand by me.
Well, that was the late Ben E. King, who passed away April 30th at the age of, I believe it was 76. That harkens back to an interesting age of music and civil rights. Benny King came up with that one. I think that was in, I believe, 1961 when that one was first released. And it really didn't become a major hit and part of our culture until 1986 on a re-release. And I believe there was a film that came out which featured that song, and then people kind of rediscovered a song that was 25 years old, and then it became popular. But Benny King was a very talented musician, and obviously he will be missed. But as I'm bringing this up, it reminds me of what happened in Detroit in the late 60s. And earlier, well, a few months ago, as we had just started this program, we had focused on civil rights, and with the civil rights, we played a clip about the riots in Detroit in 1967, and that was right at the time of Motown. And so here we have all these riots going on, and part of the town being burned down. But then, behind the scenes, there was some wonderful music that was being made. And when I look at the stuff that happened in this last week in Baltimore, isn't there another way? Well, in order to figure that out, let's go and take a look at the history of Motown.
I think when you consider the history of music, especially in America, I think it was one of the most important periods ever. And Motown went on to influence everyone. It was one of the most important things in the history of mankind. The fact that a black man in very troubled racial times in Detroit became the leader in pop music. They had 90 or more #1 pop hits with black artists in a time that black artists had no freedoms in America.
How do you borrow $800 from your family kitty, and on the structure of that $800 you build this incredible edifice, which was the greatest achievement in independent record companies there's ever been? Rhythm and blues was crossing over under the name of rock and roll, and then in 1954, the first rock and roll hits appeared in the hit parade.
There were a lot of black artists, R&B artists that we now, know as being world famous and being architects of rock and roll, who couldn't get played on pop radio. So people like Little Richard, Fats Domino, they were writing these great songs, but it was Pat Boone who had a hit with Ain't That a Shame. Pat also did Tutti Frutti, and so there were white versions of a lot of black songs.
And then in 1956, I saw Elvis Presley give America black people.
Because it wasn't what people wanted. He was going against the grain. He took old black blues songs and converted them into something that he could really make for himself.
But of course, the tremendous enthusiasm for him meant that young people accepted it.
Barry Gordy at this particular time was doing a guy named Barrett Strong. And Barrett Strong was singing a song called Money, and it became a big, big hit.
Barry had been a successful songwriter for Jackie Wilson. And Bill Robinson, Smokey, said, "Barry, you should start your own label."
He worked for Ford Motor Company, and he worked on the assembly line, and he began to marvel at how he would go to work or come to work in the morning, and at the end of the day you have this brand new beautiful vehicle, He actually used that same simple technology in applying it to his artists.
When Motown was being established, was bringing on young writers such as Lamont Dozier.
I went in as a songwriter, producer, artist, and whatever else they could throw on the plate. And shortly thereafter, he brought in Smokey Robinson and Miracles. And so that went very well, as you know, with Shop Around. And then he signed another little group called Marvelettes with Please Mr. Postman happened.
This place was open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And there was just a hit factory, one after the other after the other.
These things happened in this era of civil rights, and in the face of persistent, now inconceivable hatred. This did affect Motown slightly, in the sense that some of their early albums did not show black people. For example, Please Mr. Postman, the album by the Marvelettes, did not show any human beings. It showed a mailbox. And as late as 1965, the Isley Brothers, This Old Heart of Mine, had two white teenagers at the beach on the cover. The young Americans who had grown up without the 100 years plus of prejudice had just taken this to their hearts. It didn't occur to them to think it was anything other than what it was. And Motown Records regularly went into the charts in an astonishing way.
He did start with the idea of creating a sound that would transcend race and transcend the boundaries that we found ourselves in this nation in the 50s. And he was very successful in doing that. It was the sound of young America.
Not the sound of black America, not the sound of Negro America. It was the sound of young America.
The question came up, I don't want my music just heard by this group of people, by the only African Americans at the time. I want my music to be enjoyed by everybody. Why don't we just make it music for everybody? And so that was a shift in thinking, to be able to sort of think outside of the prescribed record industry boxes.
The lyrics themselves, weren't about civil rights, but what was about civil rights was the fact that all these acts, black acts, were crossing over to the pop charts. There was something different about Motown. I mean, the Supremes in their dresses and their wigs, they were incredibly glamorous. They became like American royalty. Berry Gordy had all these acts record, not just the hits, but he had them record other albums. So the Supremes sing Rodgers and Hart. The Four Tops did a Broadway album. So he was really integrating that music with white pop music. You didn't think about it. You just accepted these acts. There was the Beach Boys, there were the Supremes, there were the Beatles and the Four Tops. It was like you were colorblind when you thought about these acts. And that was very subtle. Whether it was intended or not, Mary Wilson actually had a middle-aged white woman who come up to her at this time, and she said to her, we don't let our children watch Negroes on television, but they love the Supremes, and that's just okay with us. So it definitely advanced the civil rights movement.
It was at a time, there were dark times in the racial struggle in America, and they had 90 #1 pop hits by black artists, which was completely unheard of. You probably will never hear of that again.
I think that it was basically the social backdrop and the music and the record industry feeding off of each other and informing each other. Maybe these songs inadvertently initially started to strike a nerve within the social fabric. Obviously the artists, such as Marvin Gaye and the writers, etc., started to take notice of this and be able to now reincorporate this and use it as food for their creativity.
They'd already sold millions of records, and they were like, okay, I got a platform, now let me use this to really help to enlighten the public about my view of what I think is going on, exactly the song, what's going on.
So almost every artist would have songs that reflected the world condition. But Although he wasn't steering it, Berry Gordy approved of it because he agreed with it and it was profitable. What's to resist?
You're talking about not only the civil rights era, you're talking about the emergence of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and other leaders as strong political figures. You're also talking about the Vietnam War.
It's a tall order to compare how Motown contributed to the civil rights movement in comparison to seminal figures such as Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. Did it contribute, I think, to the overall atmosphere? It did. And by this music being able to reach across racial lines, to me, Motown and its aesthetic, its level of songwriting, musicianship, professionalism in the performers, really held a mirror up to the social consciousness.
So here we have a picture of our founder, Mr. Berry Gordy, and also Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., civil rights activist, along with Miss Lena Horne and also Dr. Billy Taylor, jazz professor from Southern University. Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech was debuted here for the first time ever in the city of Detroit on June 23rd of 1963 after the Freedom March. Before Dr. King left town, our mobile recording unit recorded his speech live, brought it back home, gave it that Motown magic, and gave Dr. King the very first copy and also the rights to the speech. Along with Dr. King being a humanitarian, he's also a Motown recording artist.
The night after Martin Luther King was assassinated, the Supremes were invited on the Johnny Carson show just to talk, and they sang Somewhere from West Side Story. And they had always had a little portion of that song where they spoke. Well, from that night on, they changed that spoken word part to talk about Dr. Martin Luther King's dream. They weren't doing what Martin Luther King was doing, but in their own way, they were advancing civil rights to me. I mean, I actually saw that on the Tonight Show that night with Johnny Carson. It was very emotional.
And in that horrible year of 1968, which was the most difficult year for America and for Western civilization in my lifetime, a year which featured the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy, the Vietnam War at full tilt. And I asked Marvin in the mid-70s if that had been what had set him towards thinking about the issues which he addressed in the What's Going On album in 1971. And he said he hadn't thought about it, but it made sense to him.
We're not all artists. And what makes people such as Marvin Gaye and the way he delivered some of those protest songs so effective is that he was able to communicate how we were feeling and articulate in a way that non-artists we couldn't get that out. And it gave us that voice.
So Marvin had this great, legendary success, and What's Going On is still considered one of the top 10 albums of all time.
I'm pretty sure that in the early 60s, when people were making pop music singles, they probably weren't thinking of any kind of lasting legacy or that these songs would have any impact beyond the few weeks they were on the chart. But here we are 50 years later, and these songs are our treasures. I mean, they're our culture.
The information technology age has had a fascinating effect on how young people experience the past. Anything that happened before breakfast is equally old. People love Motown, but they don't think, the social circumstances that bred these records were. They just think, after the fact, Stevie Wonder, genius, all-time great recording artist, or Marvin Gaye, visionary, or Supremes, top girl group of all time. The story of the great people of history and of entertainment is fascinating. They didn't do everything in one afternoon. They had a series of experiences. And it's that series of experiences which makes their accomplishments even more remarkable. To think that Berry Gordy could have been on an assembly line and applied that to music and wound up with what he did It is amazing. And it becomes more amazing with each passing day because no one else is doing it.
You know, the Tops, I remember Duke Faker coming back from Europe. He said, man, do you realize how big you guys are? Because we didn't actually hear about it. Nobody was telling us just how prominent we were in the music, in the business. Every day somebody will go, oh, Mr. Dozier, thanks for the music. They still recognize the feeling, the sound. And we put something out there that I think will last forever.
These things just don't happen now. People don't make records about social change, about war protest. For people who've been around the block a few times like me, it's very frustrating because you want to think that music can still be a progressive force in society, whereas now it's mostly a recreational force in society.
Everything that's going on now may not even have a shelf life of 2 to 3 years, let alone 5 or 10. Certainly not 30 or 40 or 50. This is why the music industry is in turbo spin.
I mean, this is not to say that the people who are making these records are evil, but it's just they're kind of disappointing me because they have more power than they know. And if they used it, they could affect social change. Motown was perfectly placed to both reflect and inspire social change.
Oh, they talk about social change, but here's the thing. If you take a look at what's going on around us now, where are the Supremes and the Marvelettes of this current generation? We don't see them. I mean, the Supremes really, I think, did more to advance positive civil rights than probably anybody else that's out there. I mean, even Martin Luther King Jr., unfortunately, he was assassinated. He only was able to go so far, but I think the Supremes took it up from there. And the fact that music is what unites a lot of people, that the Supremes and the Marvelettes and some of these other Smokey Robinson and even Benny King did a lot to bridge that racial gap between the whites and the blacks. And obviously they should be commended for that. But now when you take a look at our current generation, what is happening on the music scene? I mean, Beyonce, Jay-Z, Snoop Dogg, or Snoop, whoever he calls himself these days, what are they doing to bridge this divide? I'm not seeing it. I think back to a lot of the gangster rap that's out there right now. It's all angry. I hear, I don't listen to it myself, but I hear it in cars. I pull up at a gas station and I hear gangster rap coming out of the car next to me that, of course, I've heard 3 blocks away because they have, it's all about that bass. Shake the whole block. But everything I'm hearing is anger, 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 anger. And when it gets reinforced, especially in a community that's all they listen to, it all becomes angry. It's all about the anger. That's what the divisiveness is. That's what's driving us apart. It's a lot of anger. And yes, some of that anger is justifiable. I won't deny that at all. But music is the thing that can bridge us. And I'd love to be able to say that Beyonce or Jay-Z or Snoop Dogg did the best they could to start bridging that gap between blacks and whites. Well, the thing that makes Motown really special is the fact that they produced music. It was good music from artists that appealed to everybody. It did not matter what your racial background was when you listened to the music. And it's something that people use to unite. But unfortunately, we're not seeing that. We had the protests in Ferguson recently. And now, let's take a look at what happened with a man named Freddie Gray.
April 12th, 2015. Baltimore man Freddie Gray is arrested after a police foot pursuit. Shown here on cell phone video, Gray is in handcuffs as police escort him into the back of a police van. The answer to what kills Gray lies in what happens next.
We found new information, and we will continue to find more information as we go.
At a news conference this week, Baltimore police announced the release of what they say are a series of surveillance cameras that show the incident's timeline. 8:39 a.m., Gray runs through a housing complex. Less than 2 minutes later, cameras capture a police van driving towards Gray. Lights flashing, a squad car follows. Just before 8:42 a.m., Gray is on the concrete, under arrest. 2 bicycle cops hover over him. Within seconds, residents casually begin to gather at the scene, some with cell phone cameras. By 8:44 a.m., the police van returns to frame. Its back doors open. Gray appears to be loaded into the back. At 8:46 a.m., the van drives off. A police union attorney told CNN what may have followed is a so-called rough ride, or a deliberate tactic used by police to harm unbelted, handcuffed passengers. Gray was not buckled in, though the police commissioner says he should have been. On its way to the police station, the van makes 3 stops. At 9:11 a.m., nearly 30 minutes after Gray's arrest, the police van is seen making one of those stops. Its back doors open as police pick up another prisoner. 15 minutes later, police call an ambulance for Gray when they arrive at a precinct. Nearly a week since his death, police have still not released a timeline or information about their last interaction with Gray.
We know more details about those 3 stops that police van made. According to police, during the first stop, Gray was placed in leg irons. During the second stop, they say they stopped to, quote, deal with Gray, though we don't know exactly what that means. That part is also under investigation. During the third stop, according to the police commissioner, Gray was seen on the floor of the van requesting a medic. Police say mistakes were made. They also say that their investigation is ongoing.
Well, it was the arrest of Freddie Gray. Now, who was Freddie Gray? He was just a local guy, just like anybody else, except this was a man who had a rap sheet. I think last I heard it was like 18 different arrests. 18 different arrests. Most of these were drug convictions. Dealing cocaine and heroin, marijuana, inside Baltimore. And as much as there are people who want to talk about, legalizing marijuana, I would hope that they are not in favor of legalizing heroin and cocaine. But this is the stuff that Freddie Gray was into. And so on that particular day, and the video started off talking about him running, what caused him to run? The fact that he was in the middle of a drug deal on a Sunday morning? He's getting ready to pass on drugs, and police ended up spotting him, and he made eye contact with the police, and then he decided to run. But it always seems that with the incident in South Carolina that happened. Whenever you run from the police, that's when the stuff starts to happen. This is when things get out of hand, and that's what happened in this case. Now let's take a look at what happened with Freddie Gray's funeral.
I'm going to miss your smiling face. I think of you and wonder why. I might cry or smile, but at the end of the day, I am one day closer to you.
And on April the 12th at 8:39 in the morning, 4 officers on bicycles saw your son. And your son, in a subtlety of revolutionary stance, did something black men were trained to know not to do. He looked police in the eye. And when he looked the police in the eye, they knew that there was a threat, because they're used to black men with their head bowed down low, with their spirit broken. He was a threat simply because he was man enough to look somebody in authority in the eye. I want to tell this grieving mother, you ought to have your post checked out, because you are not burying a boy, you are burying a grown man who knew that one of the principles of being a man is looking somebody in the eye. At 8:40, your son began running from the police. He began running at 8:41. According to the timeline, he stopped. He stopped not because he was out of breath. He stopped not because he was a weakling. He stopped not because asthma had kicked in. He stopped because somewhere within the inner recesses of his own mind, he made up in his mind, I'm tired of living in a box. And so he stopped running.
The Baltimore police became the pallbearers of an alive man and turned the paddy wagon into a tombstone. We're here because we feel threatened. All of our sons are at risk. The number's not been called on yet. There's too much killing, too much hatred, too much violence, too much fear. In this community, he is more than a citizen. He's a martyr. Fred Mathers, let nothing, family, stop you from marching. When you march, call his name. When you pray, call his name. And when you get there, Fred, tell him until we're still fighting. Tell Mayor Gibbons we're still fighting. Tell Diallo we're still fighting. Tell them we're not backing up. Tell them we're still marching. We're not mourning. Tell them the angels are flying. Tell them let nothing break them. Tell them keep hope alive through it all. Tell them through it all keep hope alive.
Reverend Jesse Jackson, in that clip you just said, there's too much hatred, there's too much violence, there's too much fear. Yeah, there probably is, at least as far as the, I don't know about fear, but as far as the hatred and violence, yes. And why did Freddie Gray stop at 8:40 in the morning? Now, that's the one thing we don't know, but when you're being chased by police, you could be out of breath. Or if you happen to have drugs on you, then perhaps you took the time to ingest them, which could also explain later behavior. Now, we're obviously going to learn more about things as time goes on. But, yes, a black man died. A black man broke his spine or in his neck. There was a lot of angst over that. I still don't know why there was that much angst over a drug dealer. But I don't live in Baltimore, so I will not, I will probably never understand why. But what happened after the funeral? And that's what we're going to look at next.
Very much with the protesters. These young men are incredibly angry about everything happening.
Taking straight up. We here straight up. Straight up.
As you can see, there is a lot of emotion running through the streets here. We are now moving on to North Street, which is a very big avenue here in Baltimore. Thousands, perhaps 2,000 people. They marched first to the Western District Police Station, and then they marched over to the area where Mr. Gray was taken into custody. The last time he was seen standing, basically, he went and fell into a coma shortly after and died 7 days later. There is one small group of protesters here. There are several hundred more coming up behind us on other streets. And as you can see, they have shut down traffic in this area of Baltimore. So far, police showing great restraint. But what they are asking for is for all six of those police officers who were named today to be charged with first-degree murder. They say that they are going to march on the City Hall on Thursday. And at that point, a little impossible here, but at that point, they will take over City Hall until they get those individuals arrested.
We will kill straight up.
Now, Miguel, I don't know how well you can hear me.
Extraordinarily unhappy.
Extraordinarily. I mean, and you have them talking about him being murdered. They're walking by you. They're yelling the F-bomb left, right, and center here to your cameras. I mean, what's the tone? And the anger is very palpable, I will say, right? This is not as calm as people might have expected.
This is Gilmore Homes section of West Baltimore. It is a very tough neighborhood. You see burned out houses everywhere. You see a lot of poverty everywhere. You see food security. People can't afford to eat in this neighborhood. There is great anger and frustration, and they feel that the police force in this neighborhood doesn't stand up for their rights only knows how to arrest them. In the case of Freddie Gray, for instance, the police say that he made eye contact with police and then fled, and that's what caused them to go after him. In any other city, in any other town, not probable cause, but in this neighborhood of Baltimore, it is, and the people in this neighborhood, hello, I met you last night, the people in this neighborhood are sick and tired of it, and they want it to stop. This Freddie Gray episode, for all the terrible, awful things that have happened in this area, Freddie Gray has lit a fuse, has been a lightning rod for this neighborhood.
So lit a fuse and is a lightning rod, and everybody's all angry and mad. So one person dies, and what happens next? Another community. Another community goes up in smoke.
Well, at least 15 officers have been injured as rioting youths started throwing rocks at police. Buildings have also been set on fire. Some of them are still burning. Police officers have been dispatched to protect firefighters who came under attack while trying to extinguish the fires. Well, RT's Alexei Yaroshevsky is at the scene and reports from Baltimore.
We have people here in Baltimore walking the streets and asking us a question: is this a war going on here? Now, what you're seeing right now here is just one of the fires now blazing, now raging across the city of Baltimore. We got here first, some 10 minutes before the fire crews arrived, and they obviously have a lot on their hands right now. The fire scanner reports of at least a dozen fires raging now across the city of Baltimore. The police presence is huge in the city right now. There are several lines with riot policemen and the National Guard. We have seen several trucks of the National Guard pull up there. They are securing the perimeters of pretty much the whole part of western Baltimore. The scenes here are of course very chaotic. They may not be as concentrated and as crazy as they were during the day when the riots started, but still we cannot say that the situation is under control. Things went ugly after people came to attend the funeral of Freddie Gray, the African-American male who died in the police custody on April 12th, after which there were reports of certain flyers circulated among the people who attended the funeral saying purge. After this, it's not clear whether those flyers caused it, but riots broke out just a few blocks from where I'm standing right now, and things went really ugly. There were rocks thrown at the police. The police responded with tear gas. For the moment, we know of at least 15 police officers who were injured. At least two of them were injured seriously. We also know of 27 arrests which had been made in relation to those riots. But again, the situation is not under control. And what we've been hearing from the police officials on the ground, they are not saying that the situation has calmed down any slightest at the moment.
Well, Alexei, you were in Ferguson last year. How does what we're seeing at the moment in Baltimore compare with what we saw last year?
Indeed, I had been to Ferguson twice, and I can say what is happening right now in Baltimore looks to be worse than what was happening in Ferguson, primarily because what we saw in Ferguson was pretty much localized in one area. This was just a few blocks on South Florissant Avenue. Now, here in Baltimore, the unrest is spreading across the city. It's happening in the west, in the east, and again, there's a dozen buildings on fire, so it looks worse. The one common denominator between the two protests in Ferguson and here is that there was a part of peaceful protesters here and here and there. The people who went out into the streets to voice their message of discontent against police brutality, they had no intent of burning places down, they had no intent of looting, and then there were troublemakers both here and in Ferguson. We'll have to wait and see until we get more information about what kind of people were arrested, were they local, were they from out of town, to see who actually incited those riots here in the city of Baltimore.
So now that was the scene that we saw. It was mainly on a lot, television. You couldn't have missed it unless you were like me studying for a major paper on, economics of Nigeria. That's what I did all week. But I managed to catch enough of this coverage So what does Al Sharpton and what does Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake have to say about what was happening in Baltimore? And what they say is quite interesting.
Baltimore can be the model of how we correct it, how we turn it around, how we show the nation that this is enough. That is what we are committed to do. So I want this mayor to know, we don't know the political differences, we don't know whatever, but we do know that whatever happens going forward will set a national tone toward national solutions.
The reason why nothing can happen to the officers, and again, that the justice system will be what it will. We want the process to go forward. You're innocent until proven guilty. We're going to do all of that. But let's just say it was South Carolina. Even if the same thing happened, because of the laws in this state, we can't do anything until after the trial is over. And when I went down to Annapolis to try to fight for reforms, simple reforms for the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights, people looked at me like I had three eyes. We will get justice for Freddie Gray. Believe you me, we will get justice. And we're going to do it because we're going to work together, because if, with the nation watching, 3 black women at 3 different levels can't get justice and healing for this community, you tell me where we're going to get it in our country.
Well, you tell me where we're going to get it for our country. Actually, I'm going to show you where we're going to get it from our country, because this happened right during the middle of those protests, probably unbeknownst to Mayor Rawlings Blake.
It was the one moment from the chaos in Baltimore that had people cheering for more.
Mother of the Year.
I leaped out of my chair and said, yes! I was captivated.
Captivated by a Baltimore mother reading the riot act to her 16-year-old son. To remove him from the riot.
You won't be out here doing this dumb Get the over here!
We now know her name is Toya Graham, and she's a single mom of 5 girls and a boy. Here's what she told CBS News about her brand of tough love.
That's my only son, and at the end of the day, I don't want him to be a Freddie Gray.
The Baltimore man whose death in police custody sparked protests, her tough discipline won muttered admiration and outright applause.
Of a mother desperately trying to keep her son from joining the rioters. And you know, she saw. Yeah!
She quickly started to trend on Twitter, #BaltimoreMom. She went to pick up her son at the mall because she heard trouble was brewing there.
He said, Mom, when I seen you, my instinct was to run. You know, I'm a no-tolerant mother. He knew he was in trouble.
The video was shared and analyzed from the right.
Like, look, right there is the moment that I think just gripped my heart.
And the left.
Here's a kid that'll take a brick and throw at a cop, but ducks when his mother comes and slap him.
Is he the perfect boy? No, he's not. But he's mine.
Send in the moms, read one headline. Maybe you really are the mother of all moms when you can inspire this kind of look in your tough guy son. Chinimo, CNN, New York.
Well, that's quite a contrast compared to the mayor of Baltimore. So the mayor of Baltimore is wondering, what do we do? What do we do? And yet we have somebody in Toya Graham who took matters into her own hands. And that matter was to make sure she disciplined her own son. But she said something really profound, was that when he saw his mother, the first instinct he had was to run. Well, maybe if we would have Toya Graham, and people acting more like her in disciplining their children in the inner city, that we would get more respect for parents, but we would also get more respect for the police force. So that way, when a guy like Freddie Gray looks a cop in the eye and decides not to run, and then we can avert things like what happened in Baltimore. We can quit burning our communities down. So speaking of Stephanie Rawlings Blake, let's take a look at what she had to say about the handling of the protests that night.
And I've made it very clear that I worked with the police and instructed them to do everything that they could to make sure that the protesters were able to exercise their right to free speech. It's a very delicate balancing act, because while we tried to make sure that they were protected from the cars and the other things that were going on, we also gave those who wished to destroy space to do that as well. And we worked very hard to keep that balance and to put ourselves in the best position to de-escalate, and that's what you saw this evening.
So is that the best position, is to give thugs a place to destroy? I mean, there's got to be a better way of handling this. But wait a minute. Another word from the mayor.
Too many people have spent generations building up this city for it to be destroyed by thugs who, in a very senseless way, are trying to tear down what so many have fought for. Tearing down businesses, tearing down, destroying property, things that we know will impact our community for years. We are deploying every resource possible to gain control of this situation and to ensure peace moving forward.
At this point, 15 police officers were injured. Of the 15, 2 are still being hospitalized at this moment. The others have been released, minor injuries.
We have the juvenile curfew for 14 and under, that's 9 p.m. We will be enforcing it. 14 to 17 is 10 p.m. We will be enforcing it. Tomorrow there will be a citywide curfew, as I said, 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. in the morning. Let me be clear. What that means is, if you are not, if you are on the streets, it will be for 2 reasons: medical emergency, or you're going to work. That's it.
No doubt that the mayor means well about wanting what's best for her community, but let's take a look at Stephanie Rawlings Blake's, essentially her resume. Born March 17th, 1970. Well, that's good. I was born a year later. But she currently serves as the Vice President of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. She also serves as the Secretary of the Democratic National Committee. 1995, she was the youngest person elected to the Baltimore City Council. 2007, she became the president of that city council, and then became the mayor on February 4th of 2010, when Mayor Sheila Dixon was convicted for embezzlement. And the charter of Baltimore has the president of the city council elevated to fill the mayor's role in the event of a vacancy. So that's what she did in 2010. And then a year later, 2011, she was elected to a full term. So really, she has been a public official in the city of Baltimore for 20 years. 20 years. But what has she done to avert this within the city of Baltimore? What has she done to transform Baltimore into an area to be proud of, and not an area filled with hatred, not an area, a community where they're gonna burn half the darn town down? What has the mayor done in 20 years of public service? Well, even people in Baltimore are starting to get that.
Throughout all the cries for justice, both of Baltimore's top city officials, the mayor and police chief, have repeatedly promised a thorough investigation.
I want every stone unturned. I want everything exposed, and I want to look at every nth degree.
My commitment to the community is we'll get to the bottom of it, and we will go where the facts lead us.
Their words falling on deaf ears in the neighborhood where police confronted Freddie Gray. This is where critics of the mayor and police commissioner are increasingly vocal about both her handling the investigation into his death.
We want to put him on notice.
Tamia Burley says the mayor is on notice as well.
Have you been satisfied with her performance up until this point, or you've just not been satisfied with her since she's been in office?
To be truthful with you, I do believe that she may have tried to strive to make some changes.
but I believe that her efforts were not strong enough.
Kiara Butler and Tawanda Jones have shared the same feelings about the commissioner and mayor for some time.
It sounds like the mayor's reading from a script, because the same exact thing she told Freddie Gray's family about doing a thorough, independent review and, investigation, she told my family the same thing.
Jones lost her brother Tyrone West almost 2 years ago after he was stopped by police on suspicion of carrying a weapon. None was found. Police say West violently resisted while they tried to take him into custody. Autopsy results found West may have died because of a heart condition made worse because of the struggle with police. But an exact cause of death could not be determined. The state attorney's office cleared the 11 officers of wrongdoing, saying force was justified.
We know how he died. The witnesses in the neighborhood know how he died. He was brutally murdered. He was beat to death. He was pepper sprayed, tased, tossed on the ground like an animal.
The West family filed a civil suit against the city, which is still pending. They are hoping the mayor will listen to them now.
Right now, lives are on the line. People are dying. You look my family in the face without crying and tears. I told you how we were touched, and we didn't want this to happen to nobody. We can't bring Tyrone back, but all we trying to do is save other people's lives. We told you this. Stop playing with us and do something. Enough is enough. How many more people in your city have to die? How many more families have to feel this pain before you use the power that you have to take action?
To use the power that you have. See, the thing is, with the secretary of the Democratic National Committee, the mayor of Baltimore, I don't think she gets the fact that real lives are at stake. That people are dying in her city. That for the 20 years that she has been a member of that particular city council and involved in that government, and she's got power of selecting the police chief, and they've got power of making sure that fellow Democrats are at the highest levels of government in that city, the people still die. And see, that's the difference in handling of certain situations. This Baltimore situation under Rudy Giuliani when he was mayor of New York never would have gotten that far. Giuliani's philosophy was always, if you throw one bottle, you throw one rock, you get handcuffs. And eventually, people got the message in New York under Giuliani's administration. That's what needs to happen in a city like Baltimore in order to keep this from getting out of hand. Not to just retreat and say, well, we're going to just, it's only property, we're going to let them loot and we're going to let them do whatever they want. Because I'll tell you this, I sure wouldn't want that happening here in the Minneapolis or St. Paul cities. I wouldn't want Chris Coleman to be able to just say, oh, we're just going to give up the east side and we'll just put a perimeter from White Bear Avenue down to Arcade Street, but anything that happens in there, well, tough. I don't think that's what we need. I don't think Betsy Hodges in Minneapolis would just cordon off northeast Minneapolis and then just say, okay, or the Phillips neighborhood, and say, all right, there you go. Just go ahead and loot away. That's how things get out of hand. It needs to be stopped right away. I'm going to show you one last clip, and that's going to be Greg Gutfield.
On Monday, we watched as Baltimore police retreated from the rioters, making them bullseyes for bandits. Businesses were then shut, and a baseball game was played to no one, so no one would get hurt.
I think in the heat of a state of emergency, every decision that's made is going to be scrutinized. The Orioles wanted to make sure that they were able to continue to play. We had to make sure that we protected our police resources, so the best decision based on what was available was made.
Those empty stands were an empty stand. For such appeasement energizes those who pretend to champion the underclass when in fact they seek destruction. This is not about race, but radicals forget facts. They want friction. Radical idiocy abounds. You can't call a thug, but you can call the police an occupying force.
Well, anyhow, I can't show you any more of Greg Gutfeld because we're out of time. But thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.